To another web development video. My name is Brian Hafferkamp, and I'll show you how to make modern websites using HTML5, CSS3, and a little bit of JavaScript. In this video, we're going to be creating an animated heroes section. So it's a hero section with a background and some animated, some animated text. And let's just jump right into it. So in the past, people have said just use vanilla HTML and CSS. Excuse me. So I'm going to do that. I'm not going to use, normally I write in Pug and Sass, so I won't do that for this video. So if I make a few errors here, please forgive me. This isn't normally how I write code. So first we want to start off with we'll just call this a header, like this is going to be at the top of the page. And so we'll just go ahead and start that way. And then inside our header, so this is going to be sort of our hero section. And let's give that a class. We'll just call it hero. And inside of our hero, we want to have an inner div. So this inner div is going to contain our text. And what this does is it helps us to center our text, and it helps us to, inside of our hero section, we really want only one element that we need to sort of contain all of our text. So we want one box inside of our hero, not multiple boxes, which will have multiple boxes for the text. So I can better explain it by just writing the text. So if we have an H1, we'll call this is our super cool headline. So we have our H1 text, and then we need to put in some filler text. I've written a little, made a little website on GitHub, and it's called Meaningful Ipsum. What it is first chapters from famous stories in history, just to use instead of lorem ipsum with stupid text. You can use actual text, and the advantage of this is that it has, if you need quotations and things like that, you can see here that there's quotes and stuff like that from Alice in Wonderland. You can use A Christmas Story, Pride and Prejudice, which also, if you needed some dialogue or quotes and things like that, you could do that. You could use Frankenstein or The Heart of Darkness. Let's just use Heart of Darkness this time. So let's go ahead and get this one. A little longer piece of text, you can just copy and paste. So we paste that in there like that. And so now instead of using stupid dummy text, we're using some sort of meaningful text on the page. And the advantage of this is that it's going to mimic what you're doing a lot easier or a lot better than if you were using some Latin text, because most of us are not writing websites in Latin these days. So here we have our hero section, and this is basically what we need, but you can see here. So what we're going to do is, in order to center this in our section, we're going to take hero, and I'll show you two different ways to center the text, one using display grid, one using display flex, and you're free to use either one. Both of them are going to work just fine. But in order to do that, if we flex these items, if we flex on this hero, then these two items here are going to be side by side, because whenever you use display flex, the default is to do a row. So this part here gets one side, and then this is going to get another side over here. And the way that we avoid that is to create what I would call an inner div. So create something called hero inner. Do like that. Come down, and we'll just cut and paste So we paste this back into our hero inner. So now this div that's called hero inner lives inside. It lives inside of our hero. Okay, you can see that. So if I were to flex this, it only flexes on this item. And when there's only one item, it doesn't create some sort of like column weirdness, right? And so this really has no meaning semantically. It's just there to section this thing off to the fact that you could also, and probably should, just call this an article, because this is a sort of a self-contained unit of text. You could call this an article. You could call this a section. We always want to be mindful of screen readers and accessibility. So if you can, find ways to put in and not sprinkle in, but use your HTML5 elements. So you want to use these major tags. So headers, sections, footers, nav, articles. You want to make sure that you use those in abundance so that screen readers can more easily determine what is this that I'm looking at, and as well as robots who are coming to index your page for search engines and such. So you want to make sure that you're using the correct HTML5 tags for these. Don't just throw a bunch of divs everywhere. It's just way too easy to go in and just call it a section rather than a div. And semantically, it helps to separate your code a lot better. So it's an easy win, and it's kind of lazy development at this point to go through and just use a bunch of divs all over the place. So especially if you're writing by hand and you have some control and you're not just sort of automatically outputting code. So do the right thing semantically and just use semantic HTML tags. That's my soapbox for the day. Okay, so we have everything here that we need as far as our HTML, and this is what we're going to use. Let's go ahead and do the styling here. So we're really going to be targeting hero a lot, at least for the first part, the initial setup. So for hero, we want the minimum height to be 50 viewport heights. And you probably won't be able to see that right now unless I give it some sort of background color. So now you can see that as we change this, if we were to change this, it should change the size. So this says that the minimum size, where it should start, is this number right here. And 70 viewport heights is essentially 70% of the viewport height. So whatever that is, whether it's a phone or whatever device people are looking at your website on, the minimum height that it starts with is going to be 70 viewport heights. I guess that's how you say it, heights. So let's move into you see the space here. I'll show you how to get rid of that space. This is an H1 here at the top. Can't see it. Well, let me highlight it. I don't know. It's not letting me highlight it. Anyway, hero H1 is what that's called. And we're just going to call that margin of, it's really this top margin here that we want to get rid of. So there's a margin here and there's a margin here. That's why there's some space, but there's zero margin on the sides. So we just want to mark it 0, 0, and 1 rem. I don't know what the margin on the bottom actually was. Probably 1.5. It was probably something like 1.5. I don't know what the defaults are for Chrome, which is what I'm using. So we'll just set that to 1. So basically the top margin is 0, each side is 0, and the bottom margin is 1. If you don't know how to sort of write the shorthand for margin and padding, you should learn how to do that. Same for box, borders, things like that. So You can do these a number of different ways. There's some shortcuts if you have some uniformity to the space that you want around it, or you can do all four sides. And you think of it like a clock right here. So first one is top, right, bottom, left if you have four. But this way, this is both sides, and then this is the top, and this is the bottom if you only have three values here. So another thing to learn, and that will help you to write more efficient code if you learn how to use these. So we have our headline up here. It's in the very top left corner. That's definitely not what we're looking for. We're looking for it to be centered. And so the way that we do that is we go back to our hero what's it called? It's a header, right? We go to our hero class. And we look in our hero and we say, I'm going to show you two different ways. One is going to be display flex. And maybe this is one that you're already familiar with. So we're going to, in order to justify the content to the center, we use justify center. And basically that will center it in this section. And then the way to align it vertically is we use the property align items center, and you should see it move down to the center. Okay, so we've aligned it vertically and horizontally. Now you can't really see the horizontal centering because it's just going 100% width here. But if we go to our hero inner, and really this should be hero inner H1. We can do that. And we go to our hero inner, and we can do this a couple of different ways. We can add padding on each side. So 0 on the top, and let's say 3 rem of padding on the sides. And that will give us a little bit of padding here. And you can see that without this, it should put it over to the side. We're probably not going to see it because of the padding. Again, this is the entire area is 100%. We're just putting some padding on the inside of the container. So if we used margin, maybe you'd be able to see that. So the same thing happens, but the edge of the element is now right here, and we're putting space outside the block, not inside. So maybe that changes it. That doesn't change it either. All right, well, there we go. So the other way to do this would be to come down and do a maximum width. And so let's say a maximum width of 75%. So again, we have a maximum width on our element of 75%. And because this is all centered, it's actually pushing it over to the center. So if we haven't center aligned it with justify center, then we won't be able to see it in the center. It'll always be sort of the default. The default justify content is always flex start, which is to the left of the page whenever it's a left to right situation. But as soon as we center that text and it's not taking up all of the space, then it's going to be center aligned. You can see it'll always be aligned to the center. And it only takes up a maximum width, so it'll grow until it takes up 75% of the section. So it sort of mimics the padding on each side. This could be anything you want. It could be 50%. If you want it to be a little tighter to the center. So you can see that, or you can change it so that when it gets out here, it's 50%. And when you get here, that it takes up a little more space in here. And the way you would do that is you would put a a media query. So at media, and the minimum width. Let's say, what would that be? Maybe here. So minimum width of 1,000 pixels. Let's just pick a nice round number. Then we say that our maximum width is going to be 50%. But, oh, I'm sorry, we need hero inner. So we need the hero inner to be a maximum width of 50%. We can get rid of this. And otherwise, we want it to be equal to 80%. And what this will do is from 0 to 1000 pixels, it's going to be 80%. And then at the minimum width of 1000 pixels, so when it reaches 1000 pixels, then the hero inner max width is going to be 50%. So we're at, you can see how it changes. So here it takes up a lot more of the space, but then when you get to here, then it only takes up 50% of the space. And maybe that's a little extreme. So maybe something like that, and maybe something more like that, and maybe this one should be really 700. So as soon as you get to, so this would be like a mobile device, and you can see how it just gives you a little bit more space. Gives you some space away from the edges, but not, but it gives that a little bit more room to breathe when you get out to a larger space. So that's how you can control the spacing with flexbox. So that's using flex. So we'll just say for display flex, or flexbox, I guess. And then we'll turn, oh, the last part is we should center all of our text. So typically you don't want to do that with this much text here. And let's cut our text down a little. Like this maybe. So this would be acceptable. Most people say 1, 2, if you go over like 3 lines, so we're at 6. If you go over 3, you probably shouldn't be centering any text. It makes it more difficult to read. So if we get rid of this, then you can see that this is just a much easier section to read. So we can leave that there for now, just as it is. And so we have our headline here, and that's going to be centered all the time because we're using our flex box. But as soon as we take this off, it will not be centered anymore, and we're back up to top left, right? So that's definitely not where we want to be. So let me show you a display grid. So this will be grid. And this one will be flexbox. So we'll just sort of get those out away from each other. So if we say display grid, one of the interesting things about display grid is once you set it, you can see that nothing's happened, right? When you put display flex, something happens. When you just say display grid, nothing happens. Now, if you wanted a 2-column grid, you could make this into 2 columns, or if you wanted this to be 2 columns in the middle with columns on the side, you can make this anything you want to with CSS Grid. You can do all kinds of crazy sort of configurations and layouts just with this little bit of text. But what we want to do is we want to use Grid's centering properties. And whenever we say display grid, we can come down and simply say place self center. I think that's what we do. It's not on this one. That's why it's not working. Let's take this off. And we want to go to the inner item. So let's go to the inner item, and then we'll say place self to the center. So the outer hero section, so this outer hero section is display grid. Now hero inner is the only child of this grid. Okay, so when you have children of the grid, you can place them in many different places, and center is one of those. I think you can use some of these keywords. So if you use end, it's going to put it vertically and horizontally at the end, which is in the bottom left corner. Can we do both? we can. So if you, this is a horizontal, this is vertical alignment, start, and this is horizontal alignment at the end. So start is here, and for vertical alignment, this is start, center, end. For horizontal alignment, this is start, center, end. So you can see now that it's vertically aligned to the start position at the top. It's horizontally aligned at the end position here to the far right. If you do end, end, that puts it vertically at the end, horizontally to the right. Or if you say start, then that puts it lower left. So you're in the start position horizontally, you're in the end position vertically. So that's how place self works. And so if we just say center, that's the same as saying center, center. And then we can just use the shortcut of one particular value, and that's center. So this is the super duper easy way to align one item inside of your text, and it does the same thing that Flexbox does. It declares it with fewer values. It also, I think, Grid gives you some more options to do alignment vertically and horizontally, especially as you're looking at different pieces of content inside of here. The more complex your content gets, I think the more you're going to need to use CSS Grid, especially if you're looking at aligning things both vertically and horizontally. CSS Flexbox is only really meant to align things in one direction. So these two actually work together. They seem diametrically opposed to each other sometimes, but ultimately they work together. They work together very beautifully. I typically tend to use CSS Grid as a superstructure, sort of like the structure of the building. And you see the big beams and things like that when they're creating a big building as sort of the skeletal structure. And then inside of that, you can do some placement of things, but if it's sort of simple placement, aligning things along one axis, I will go ahead and use Flexbox for that. If it's a more complex alignment, then I'll layer grids inside of grids, just because you need a little bit more fine-tuned control, and CSS Grid gives you, in my opinion, it gives you a little bit more fine-tuned control and a little bit easier to do it, honestly, than using the flex property, the grow and the shrink. And it tends to get to the point where it's a little bit harder for me to understand and control it. So CSS Grid makes a lot more sense to me as far as controlling many different items, even in a small space, which maybe I'll do that for another video, because a lot of times we think about Grid as like this big layout superstructure, but you can use Grid for all types of different layouts inside of layouts and really small icons and pieces of information. It's really handy for doing that kind of thing. So here we have our section here, and as far as the CSS is concerned, we're good to go here. And this could be, it could be any color you want. You can make this a blue or whatever. What we want to do is we want to put an image in here. So if we can, the background image, and this is how you input an image. You say URL, and then inside of here you put the URL to the image. Now I'm going to pull in something from source.unsplash.com. Everyone is probably familiar with Unsplash. And then after the slash, then you put what size you would like to see. So automatically it's just going to go out and bring any old image in, like a random image from Unsplash. You can also put in a URL parameter here and bring in whatever you want. So if we just put like images of cities, so it's going to bring in a random image of a city every time. It'll be different each time. that you bring in this random image. So kind of a cool URL to learn, just to input dummy images, and they're high quality images from Unsplash. They're large images, and so large high quality images that you don't have to download and upload to a server just to use for placeholders is very nice. So what we're going to do is go to the background and just set this background a little better. We're going to say size, and size, where's my Z key? Size is going to equal cover, and background position is going to equal center. So whenever we set the size to cover, it makes sure it covers all of the space. And when we set background position to center, then that means that the center of the image is the part of the image that's showing, but you could just as easily say the right. I don't know if this image, it's not going to show because it's set to cover, but you can change just sort of where, which part of the image shows. Could do bottom. So you can actually manipulate and change which part of the image shows. You can do this by percentage as well. So 0%, sorry, I'm on a Mac, 0%, 50%, and that should change, which part of the image is actually showing. So you can play around with those values with background position a little bit. For the most part, we're going to want to use center, especially for just an establishing image. But if for some reason, because what it does is it changes the focus as the viewport changes. So if your image has its main action that you want to see on the left, then you want to make sure that you keep this left. And what it'll do is, as the image changes, it'll always be showing the left side. Now that's a little bit more of a default, so really you're going to see the right side of the image is what you really want to do. So now you can see that even as the section grows, we're super laser focused in on the right side. So if out here we get everything, but as the space shrinks, it keeps the focus on the right hand side of the image. So super helpful just as far as art direction goes. And please art direct your websites a little bit, art direct your images, so that the experience for the user is good, but also so that the experience for the company or for the website or whoever you're building the website for is appropriate. You don't want to, if the main part of the image is on the right, you don't want to cut that out whenever the person is on a smaller screen size. You want to keep that as the focus. So think about what part of the image should be focused, what part of the image should be there all the time. If it doesn't matter, maybe center is a good way to go. If it does matter, then you should really take some care into thinking about which part of this needs to be showing, needs to be on screen at all times. For us here, center is going to be fine, and the center, you can see it moves left and right because it's always trying to keep this center section in the middle of the section. Okay, so background size of cover usually negates that anyway, because it's going to try to make the image fill the entire space. You can see how it grows even as the space changes. Obviously this with the text is no good, so we're going to need to go to our hero inner, and we're going to call that color of white. And that should color all of our text. If it doesn't, you might have to go into each individual element and color your text. But typically, if you set a color on an outside div like this, an outside section, it will color everything inside. So that's part of how the cascade works. So use the cascade in your favor. Don't make it work against you. It's not a great image here. So let me show you how to do that. And you can just go and find an image. Let's just find a kind of a dark image. This is a fine one. And we want to get this here. Let me see. Simple integration. This is more than it used to be. Okay. It's a little bit more than it used to be. It used to be just a simple little, like a simple little API that they had. But maybe it's not anymore. Let's try a couple things. Let's just see if we can put this in here. If it'll work like that. Nope. Okay, there we go. So source.unsplash.com, and then you take just the ending code here and put it in, and then that'll be here. So that gives us a little bit more contrast here. Still not great. And what we would want to do is art direct this a little bit. So we would want to bring this over because we want the text to not get lost. You see how it sort of gets lost there? So we can move our text around. So instead of placing self, remember, we can do vertical alignment. So we can say end and center, and that's going to put it down. We can say end and start, and that's going to be to the bottom left. And so now you can see that this gives us a little better spacing over here. You can handle padding in a couple different ways. You can pad the whole inner div by 1 rem. So the inner div is still at the section of this outer hero. But what happens is there's space inside there. So we can see that and test it if we go to our debugger. How do you do it on a Mac? Like that. And then if we go to our chooser here, then we can see that this is our article inner. And so article inner is all the way up against the edge of the screen, but you can see that this green part here is the padding, and we're pulling it away from the side of the section, but we haven't moved the article or the hero inner section. We've only moved the padding and sort of separated this from the edge of the section. So that's one way that you can do it. You could also use margin there and actually pull the hero inner section away from this right here. Either way is fine. There are sort of positives and negatives of using margin and padding, and you'll just have to run into those, honestly. But this looks okay. We have one thing that we haven't done is set our meta tag. So I never did that, so that's why it's giving kind of a funny look to everything. But we have our hero section, and once you get to a certain width, so this is a laptop here, then maybe at 700 pixels, we want to place everything at the center. So this might look good for here, but maybe when we get out here, we really want it to be centered. And so now you can see that it's center aligned here. Okay, and so now for the last part. The last part is our animation. So we have a couple of different things. Let's go ahead and put a class on here. So just so that we can target the class. And the class is going to be hero headline, I guess. And this one will be class of hero text. So let's do it that way. And we can go into here and we'll just kind of create some space. And this will be our animation. Okay, now the best way to do animations is to use the CSS animations, especially for sort of a simple animation. And what we're going to do is I'll show you a couple different things. One will be the entire section here animating. And what we want to do is have it come up a little bit and fade in. It's going to fade in and fade up is really at the same time. So you get sort of this kind of gradual move up. As the page loads, it's going to sort of pop in, fading, but also moving up just a little bit. And we can do this pretty easily, especially when it's only animation, sort of a linear animation. It's going to be not particularly difficult. So let's go ahead and I'll show you how to do the whole section together so that all these fade in and up at the same time, and then I'll show you how to stagger the headline first, and then do a separate animation for the text. So what we want to do is we want to say, well, okay, we'll say at keyframes. So this is how we declare our animation, and then we need to give our animation a name. We'll call it fade in up. So you can use hyphens like this, or you can use camel case like this. Either way is fine. And then when we want to do something, 0% is going to be at the start of the animation. 100% is what we want to happen at the end of the animation. You can also do keyframes in between. You could do 25%, so when the animation gets to 25%, it needs to do something else, or be in a particular position, that kind of thing. This is such a basic linear animation that we're just going to stick with zero. So when it starts, it's going to be in one place. When it ends, it's going to be in another place. When it starts, it's going to be one opacity. When it ends, it's going to be another opacity. So this is going to be actually not a particularly difficult one, but what it's going to do is it's going to sort of introduce you if you haven't done animations before. So what we want to do is we want to have an opacity. When it starts, we want the opacity to be 0, and when it ends, we want the opacity to be 1. So remember, opacities move from 0, which is totally hidden. There's no opacity, or there's maximum or there's no opacity, right? And then at 1 is going to be maximum opacity. So there's no change to the opacity. It looks just like this. Why are you giving me an error? It's telling me there's an unknown word. We'll see. We'll see if that clears up. Did I misspell opacity? Oh. I'm not writing in SAS anymore. Okay, I told you I was going to do that. That's going to happen at different times. So it's something like this. I might have to actually look that up. I don't know. All these need brackets. Maybe I really don't write with vanilla CSS too much anymore. So especially when I'm doing these things. So there we go. So we get rid of our error. If you see a little I down here or an exclamation point, it's an error. Okay, so we have our keyframes. This animation is sort of self-contained within here, and it's called fade in up. And what we wanted to do, this is going to be the fade in part. So we want the starting opacity to be 0. We want the ending opacity of the animation to be 1. Now we'll control the timing when we go up to our actual animation. And we also want to say translate y translate y is going to be 0. So that's basically wherever you've set it in the text, like wherever you've set it on the page. And then we're going to say transform translate y. So we're moving it vertically on the y-axis. And we want it to go up by minus we'll say 20 pixels. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to be like. We'll have to fiddle around with how far that's going and if that's the right one. Now we want to set our animation, and in order to connect this animation to something, because it's just sitting out there, now you have to connect it to something. It's sort of like a function in JavaScript. Now it's just not doing anything until you call it. So we have to call our animation, and we use the animation property, and then we call our animation name, fade in up, and then we have to give it some other properties. So we're going to say 300 milliseconds. So our animation is going to happen. You can see it move over there. Our animation is going to happen over 300 milliseconds, and really it's going to be easier to see if we put it to 1 second. And then you can see it there, the way that it went. So our fade in up happened at, and the duration of it is 1000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. You can write it as 1000 milliseconds. You can write it as 1s, which is 1 second. Now you can see that once it fades up, it comes right back to where it's supposed to be. And that's because the animation is sort of resetting itself. It's sort of going through the loop and then coming back to the original animation, or the original place that we set it in the text. That's not what we want. We want it to stop at the end of the animation and not sort of reset itself. So the way we do that is we use the keyword forwards, and that leaves the animation at the end, so you can see it there. And maybe it's so subtle, maybe you miss it. Okay, so you can see the whole thing happens over 1 second. So opacity and the movement, so it moves up on the page over the course of 1 second. So that is how we do all of the text, and we would set that animation like this. We would set it on hero inner. Okay. If we want to do each individual text, now we need to put animation onto each of our elements. So we have our hero h1, and we have our hero, well, I guess we could say hero text. And then we can just call this one hero headline, because that's what it is. Okay. And then basically we can just take this animation, same thing. We're going to copy that. We're going to get rid of it on the hero inner. So it's not happening on our hero inner, but it will happen on, well, that didn't do anything good. It will happen on our headline here. You can see that. Is that what we called a hero headline? Yeah. It will happen on our hero headline. So now we've sort of separated the animation out from everything, and we put it only on the headline. Now we can also put it on the text, and both of them will fade in at the same time. So you kind of see that it still shows the same thing, right? They're both coming in at the same time, which is not what we want. We want this one to sort of pull in first, and then this one to delay just a heartbeat before it comes in, so there's kind of a staggered feel to it. This is our duration, and if you look at the animation property, and it's sort of like a background. The background property, you can put multiple sort of things on it at the same time, or you can break it out into animation duration, animation name, or whatever this is called, animation blah blah blah. You can break that out into multiple things and sort of control each of these individual properties by themselves. This is just sort of the shorthand animation property if you know what you want to put. But there is a particular order, so that if I put 1 second and 1 second, then you can see that this one controls the duration and this one controls a delay. Now 1 second is way too much, but it's exaggerated so you can see it. So it waits 1 second and then it allows this in. And if you want to learn more about the animation property, the best place always is Mozilla Developer Network. And then you can see here, these are all the different properties that you can do. So timing would be I don't use timing function very much, but we're using the animation delay, so that if you just said animation delay 1 second, then you get basically the same thing. So it's going to wait 1 second, right? Or I can put it up in here, but just to sort of see it more easily, you can put it here. And this is where I would get into anything under 1 second or anything in between 1 second and 2 seconds. I would just start using milliseconds. So you just have to think of 1,000 milliseconds is equal to 1 second. So just understanding that 300 milliseconds is 1/3 of 1 second. It's 0.3 seconds, right? Which you can do that. You can say 0.3 seconds, and that works fine too. You can see there's a little stagger. Or excuse me, you can do 300 milliseconds, and that's the same thing. And I think that's probably the sweet spot of what we're looking for. Now it looks all funny because we have this full opacity when the page loads. You can see it all when the page loads, and that's, not what we're looking for. So what we want to do is we want to set the opacity on the element itself to 0, and then we want to set this beginning opacity to 0. So what we get is this nice smooth animation. You can see it over here. What we get is a nice smooth animation because we're starting the page. When the page loads, these two elements are 0 opacity. You cannot see them. But as soon as the page loads, we're kicking in our function here. And the function is that the opacity goes from 0, which is the load of the page, to 1. So you're taking a sort of hidden element and then applying the CSS to it, and then it fades in. So if you want not the choppiness of it, then you need to set it to an opacity of 0. Whatever your starting opacity is, you want to set it there, and then you can move it to opacity of 1. And so you see that we get this super duper nice, like you can see that that's not much code, right? There's nothing really happening here in a major way. And you can see that it's bringing in a very, very sophisticated sort of fade in element, and it will happen whether you're on mobile or whether you're on a desktop. So when it comes in, you can see it on mobile as well. So that's where we are. Hopefully that's really helpful to you. I don't know. It's kind of advanced maybe a little bit, but it doesn't take much. If you know CSS already, it doesn't take much to bring in some super cool elements. And just that little bit of touch of class, even at the top, if you don't use this animation anywhere else, that is enough to sort of set apart your skills. That's enough to set apart your website as someone who's taken an extra step. So hopefully that's helpful to you. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them down in the comment section below. I know it's been a long time since I've posted anything. I've been busy with other things and a new job, and I don't know if this is the beginning of more tutorials, if there's anything that you want to learn, because I don't really know necessarily what people want to learn or what's out there that people want to understand. But if you have any of those suggestions, please put them in the comment section below. There are a lot of little wins that I can show you, and there's some super cool things to do with CSS Grid and things. All right, well, it's good to be back, good to be with you, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.